I'm Mario Martinez Jr., CEO and founder of Ingresso, and we are the creators of flymessage.io, the free personal writing assistant and text expander application. On each episode of this podcast, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you grow your sales numbers at scale. So, get your pen and paper or iPad and keyboard and start taking notes as you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Modern Selling Podcast. And yes, I've got my friends all the way down from the down under coming in, Mr. Brad Eisenhuth. He is the founder and CEO of the Outperformer, and we're here to talk about leadership-related items, culture, all kinds of great stuff. So you're in for a great show, and I'm excited. Brad, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming, my man.
Mario, I am excited, mate. I cannot believe the energy you bring to the start of this session. So let's get into it, mate. I'm pretty keen to talk all things leadership, strategy, culture, anything, anywhere you want to go, my friend.
I love it. Well, first, let's start out a little bit about your background and tell us a little bit about the Outperformer. And then I've got a very special, interesting question for you.
Oh, special question. Okay, mate. So look, the Outperformer is a management consulting business based out of Australia. We look at working with organizations across the globe. We do a fair bit in the Asia Pacific region, but we have two arms to our practice. And one arm is very much dedicated to corporate culture. So we're looking at the performance of organizations, teams, the effectiveness of how they move from where they want to be to where they need to be. And that interlinks the relationship between strategy, culture, and the way we work. The other arm of our business is very much around the SME. So we have what we call a business advisory practice, and that works with the owner, founder, or group of founders in the navigation of their strategy towards, the achievement of the goals that they have. So they deliver in slightly different ways, but one of the great things that we have in common across both sides is we're dealing with human beings, we're dealing with business strategy, we're dealing with change, and we're obviously dealing with the organizational culture, no matter how big or small it is. So that's a bit about our story.
Great. Thank you very much, Brad, for sharing some of those details. But a little bit about your background in the past. So tell me, what were you doing prior to the Outperformer?
Oh, Mario, I'm a man of many stages of my life. So in Australia, and some of you may not know this sport on your side of the world, but I started my life playing rugby league. This is the equivalent to NFL, but taking the helmet off and running around, tackling blokes and trying to score tries. So I started life at sort of high school age, and I was contracted to a club in Australia, but I was also conscious that that's not a lifelong pursuit. Injuries come, which they did for me, unfortunately. And I pursued a career I started in the space of engineering. I progressed into executive search. I moved through into writing a book about the development of the CFO. I had a very deep space around looking at the finance function in organizations. I've moved into various areas, and what I really tried to do early in my career was become what I'd call a T-type person. And that is, as I've developed my leadership, I realized that my intention was to build business. And I had the luxury of working with a recruitment and executive search practice, worked under two founders and was, operating and managing that business for a period of time, which is a great experience for me before going into entrepreneurship and to building my own practice. So I guess what the time in my career has allowed me to do is just to get into the nooks and crannies of all parts of the business. And I guess the luxury as well, when you work in executive search, you're talking to business leaders of all types. Every time we're running a mandate, every time we're looking at an organization, you learn a lot about their strategy. You really need to understand the person. You really need to understand the culture in order to, if you do it well, to find the right fit. And so for me, that was a real luxury before building the consultancy. I enjoyed it, but for me, it wasn't, the lifelong pursuit. I didn't wake up in the morning when I was a 16-year-old thinking about my career saying, hey, I hope I can help people, move from one job to another. I thought my role on this earth was to do a little bit more than that. So, I've been in a continuous pursuit of that passion of looking at how I can support people to get the most out of their life and the most out of their environment, and that shows up now just in the consulting practice. I don't know where that will go in the future. We'll keep building the practice, but mate, that's a bit about my background.
Fantastic. Well, I always ask this question of all my guests. So you're no different, and I'm looking for something juicy. And you can't use rugby because you already used that one, which, by the way, the sport is that truly a man's sport. Like, definitely you've got more, cojones than I do, because I would never be caught dead trying to hit another dude as fast as you're running without a helmet. But that having been said, tell us something nobody knows about you, even if they're looking at any or all of your social profiles.
Well, Mario, I was thinking about this, idea of the world we're in at the moment, and everyone's posting everything on social. So to be fair, there's a lot that you can find out about me pretty easily. You'll find out my kids' names. You'll find out who my wife is. You probably know more about her than me, to be fair. But the one thing you won't know is I don't take food posts at all. I will not take a picture of what I eat. It's just not something I do. And I know a lot of people do that. I'll tell you what restaurant they're in. Last night I had a beautiful bowl of spaghetti bolognese, and my good wife cooked that up for me. And mate, it was delicious. And to be fair, there's no need to share that with a big wide world, in my opinion. I just need some time to eat. And so, mate, no one's going to know. Just let the world know what I had for dinner last night. Not sure how relevant or interesting or juicy that is, but maybe in this world it is actually a little different.
Actually, so it is a little different. I will admit that, of course, when you're going through your friends and family's feed, whether it be, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it might be, you're always seeing, food, where I'm at, where I'm going. And it makes you think, man, they're living an amazing life. Why can't I do that? But that having been said, I appreciate that about you. Let's get into some content, though, some real deep content, and really get into the meat of what we want to be talking about in terms of effective leadership. And when you think about effective leadership, what does it mean to be effective in leadership, where the pace of change is so consistently high, both customers, the business, products, services, everything around you is just change, and overnight something could blow up. How about like AI? So that having been said, what does it mean to be effective in leadership given the pace of change?
Oh, Mario, and in that context you share there is so true, right? We're in this environment where everything's moving all the time, and our environment in our business feels like, particularly in some organizations I work with, it's almost like we're trying to keep up, right? Whether it's the shareholder expectation, whether it's the environmental impact, as you say, AI is blowing up at the moment. Everyone's considering, how do we adopt this? What's it even mean? I was at a conference the other day where most of the leaders in the room, honestly, were still just trying to grapple with understanding what its potential even could be, in the short term, let alone how do we adopt it? So there's all these questions that are popping up. And I guess effective leadership, there's so much discussion around leadership. It's a bit of a buzzword, when you look at it. But I try to simplify the discussion around leadership when I work with anyone, because I think what it does is it allows us to really focus on the essence of what your job is to do, right? And with all of that change going on, our leadership and the component of that part of our job is to motivate and inspire people to a future state or destination. And so we're talking about the emotional context of progress. And when you consider motivation, inspiration in a world of chaos with all these moving parts, this is around the narrative, the story that human beings are telling themselves about what it means to them to have all this change happen. Now, sometimes in a lot of environments, you'll notice this, and Mario, I'm sure you see this sometimes in your own business, where if you talk to your staff, you go, wow, okay, I can appreciate how change might be happening to them as opposed to for them, right? And so that motivation, inspiration, we're trying to find the most resourceful thinking, the most resourceful mindset and behavior set that helps us progress through all of that noise and have some discipline in our focus towards execution, right? And on the other side of our equation to leadership is management, right? So that's the introducing the structure and the logic that helps us move forward and progress with focus, with attention, with care for executing that future state. And that's where we see all of our business systems and our ways of working, and everything gets integrated into our leadership. So the two have to go hand in hand. To be a leader could be for Mario to encourage us to go and climb up a hill, and I'm very excited when I start sprinting up there, but to not be a manager at the same time, or not to have a management lens on that. I could go off without my backpack, without my tent, without anything warm to wear along the way, and we get halfway up the mountain, and Brad and Mario are freezing because we haven't thought about the path ahead, right? So that motivation and inspiration is about generation of focus on execution, that the behavior around that. And so when you simplify that doesn't mean by simplifying it, it's easy. It's just getting a focus on what our job is to do. And then the effectiveness is looking at how well our teams and our people are moving and progressing towards those results. Those results are very subjective, right? What matters in Mario's business is very different to, sales leaders one's business, to the team in HR, to the broader, concept of the entire organization moving forward, right? But in essence, if we notice and we are seeing progress towards that destination, then we are doing most of the right thing.
So that brings up an interesting question, because what are some of the symptoms that one might notice across a culture when a leader is struggling to cultivate productive progress, kind of what you were just talking about in terms of making the progress, and you would see these things. Well, what are some of the things, what are the byproducts of that, the causes and or the reasons behind that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mario. And, to be fair, there are lots of symptoms you might see, so if you're listening to this, some of these might resonate with you, some of them may not be present, but it's important to think about what are we noticing when we don't see progress in all of the change, or in all of the moving parts that are happening in our business. So the first one, obviously, is that we're not getting the results we'd like to see, right? That's a really obvious, point to look at. Okay, I've got a plan, I've got an outcome we are trying to move towards, and we're not getting it. That is an indicator that there is a deficit in leadership, or the relationship between our leadership and management. And we need to start with that first principle. But the second, area that I'd like to look at with you, Mario, and I think for a lot of listeners, it's like, okay, great, Brad. I can tell if I'm not getting results, clearly something's broken. I need to have a look at that in my culture, in the strategy I'm adopting. But then we start to look at what might be causing this. So you have silo behavior, where departments aren't working well together, and it's creating friction, it's creating lack of productivity in the general operation of day-to-day work, which isn't allowing us to focus on highest value activity. And we find that there's all of these cracks in the way that we do things, and they're holding us back rather than promoting us forward. That idea of silo is so present, particularly in larger organizations, and I'm sure some of your listeners can appreciate that. I think the other piece in this is you'll notice that you'll have a team that can be very reactive, right? Always looking at the shiny thing, or always chasing their tail, not having any moments where, as a team or as a group, we're reflecting, we're acknowledging progress, we're then taking learnings from that progress and saying, where do we go next? And that's a symptom, obviously, of the reactive nature that you might have in your environment. And it's also sometimes a case of being a little bit behind the eight ball around creating the frameworks that allow you to lead your people well, right? What does the environment need to have to take them on a journey? And, those sorts of things are very, very common. The larger the organization, the more they're present. And that's simply because there's a high degree of complexity that starts to come into place. I think the other piece that you might want to have a look at when you think about deliberate progress is you'll have people that will be moving forward and doing their best in their job. But then you need to ask the question around engagement. how engaged are they to really lean into the big questions that drive us to the next stage, right? So when we think about progress, we're usually going into the unknown. In a sales environment, that's the fact that we can't control what the customer's going to do. We can only influence and help them make good decisions that are in the best interest of both our business and their business, right? So we're always going into this unknown, and we're always pursuing something bigger and greater than where we are at any point in time. So, the engagement in that is so important. When we start to see this sense of defeatedness, when we start to see this sense of, I'm not sure if this is the right place for me to be. I don't know if this environment is actually cultivating the best out of me, right? Those sorts of scenarios are really important to put your finger on and start to ask questions around, can we create an environment that makes it easier to be engaged, and can we support that change, or is that person in the right environment? So I went across quite a broad set of areas, because it's not a simple, transactional thought process. It's something quite complex that we have to assess and analyze and think really deliberately about when we say, well, look, are we effective, and are we actually being productive here, Mario? So, and I'm sure you see that in businesses you've worked within your own business, when you start asking questions to yourself at night when you go to bed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, some of the things that you begin to observe is the crack in the employee morale, the crack in getting stuff accomplished. So I have definitely been I don't know what the right word is, the instigator of bad results, which is you're working on so many different things that nothing's getting accomplished. And now you're getting a sense of frustration that things aren't getting accomplished, or the ball isn't moving forward, or the rock isn't being pushed up the hill, or however the, illustration you want to give. And then you take a step back, and you turn around and you say, okay, what am I doing wrong as a leader? And in this case, it's too many things. It's too many things that all have become important, but really, are they all really important? And so I've seen that, and I've seen that I've been the cause of that as well. But, I think as a business leader or a business owner, you have to understand leadership. But I believe that a lot of folks do not understand what that means, and also understand if it's defined or how you've defined it. And then is it difficult to be able to follow that leadership, or to be a leader under that leadership or within that leadership? So maybe talk a little bit about how well do you think typical business managers and leaders are at understanding what the leadership culture really is? And if it's poorly defined, is it then difficult to be a leader, or can you kind of create your own mantra, if you would?
Such a good question, and it's complicated. So I'm going to sort of break it into a few parts, mate, because that's a big question, Mario. And to be fair, I shared a very basic definition that helps anchor us to the understanding of leadership before, which is around our ability to generate motivation and inspiration towards our vision. But when we sit around as a group of leaders, or we reflect on our leadership in our culture, the definition around what that looks like in Mario's company versus Brad's company versus another's company needs to be appropriate for that business, right? And this is where we start to get definition around what it looks like in terms of that vision. Where are we trying to go? What's our behavior look like when we show up? How do we help people cultivate the behavior that best fits our business because of who we want to be as an ecosystem or as a culture? What are the values that sit underneath that we will discuss and explore and understand, so we can continually be who we need to be in this culture? And there's always this clarity that falls out of that, but the reality in that definition is your ability to live it, right? Your ability to start to understand, right, well, we've got a strategy, we're trying to get to over the mountain, and we've got a bunch of priorities that we're trying to stay focused on. And while those priorities may seem simple in logic, they are complex in execution because we have moving parts around us all of the time, and the things around us are changing. We still need to be able to help our people move through that complexity, right? We have all this definition, it's our ability to bring that to life. And what starts to happen is we start to realize that we have to be who we need to be ourselves, right? We have to be authentic to ourselves. We will naturally have parts of who we are that made us a great leader already, right? And we'll have aspects of knowing and understanding our biases and where they're effective that bring people along the journey with us. And that's how we shape the further definition, which is our narrative and our engagement and our structures that work well for us as a leader, and therefore will hopefully work well for the team because we're creating an environment for them. So as we start to define, who we are as a leader and what our purpose is, then we start to define the environment, right? We get clearer around what we need to introduce into it. And that's the essence, right? It's ensuring that you have who you are. Mario is a different person to Brad. We will lead differently. We'll lead differently because we're from different cultures. We will lead differently because we have strengths and ways that we've grown up and things that are stories that we will tell. And we will always then have to go, right, here is who Brad or Mario is, and let's then take the audience and then let's make it about them. Right? Let's define what we're here to do. We're here to motivate and inspire these people. So we have to use who we are to go and take them on that journey. And that's once we're clear on that, then we can build or put all the building blocks underneath it around what they need, how they need that, what that looks like, what sort of people are going to best fit into that journey, who's not going to fit in, et cetera, et cetera. So that clarity around it at a business cultural level is very important. The clarity around it at an individual level is very important. And then your relationship between you and the people that you're serving or taking on the journey is also very important.
Is there a difference, do you think, if it's a small organization, 5 people versus a 10,000 person organization? And if so, what might be those differences?
I think the practicality of what I've shared there and the logic of how all of the moving parts is still going to be the same, right? I'm still going to have to ask the question about where are we trying to go. I'm still going to have to ask the question about who do I need to be in this? I've still got to ask the question about what does our culture need to look like to get there? How that shows up in reality is going to be completely different, right? And the pace at which I'm able to introduce ideas might be very different. If I've got a team of 5 people, I can sit down and have a coffee with them at the local coffee shop and talk about, the future and bang around some ideas, and we'll walk out of that feeling very heard and understood and engaged and be able to debate what we need to do. And you start to cascade that across a team of 1,000 people. You have to have very different mechanisms to bring that to life, right? And that's the complexity as the business grows, is to continually find methods to scale your leadership. But the principles at the end of the day are the same, right? We still have to understand human needs and who the human beings are involved in that journey so that we can shape the journey. And we still have to fundamentally be a change leader, right? Because at the end of the day, our businesses are always changing, and we're helping our business evolve in order to achieve its results, right? So those things don't change. None of the principles change. This is, if I shared at the start of the call, Mario, this is why my business, when we looked at working in corporates and when we've looked at working in SMEs, we've never had to change the principles of business management. All we've had to do is look at the context. And so for anyone listening to this discussion, go, Jesus, you're provoking me to think, but you're not giving me any answers, Brad. That's because my goal today, when I have conversations with people, is to say, you've got a context in front of you that you've got to make good judgment on. And that's the challenge in all leadership. When you've got 5 people in your team, 50 people in your team, or 500 in your team, that ability to make great judgment in the context you're in is your job, right? And so understanding that that's the difference you need to make to be effective, and that's the difference between you and the next person that might be leading, is so simple. It's right. You make judgments all day, every day, But how often do you sit back and reflect and say, was that an effective judgment or was that reactionary? Was that just Mario shooting from the hip? Or was that a really deliberate thought process that took the team forward, that helped us improve, that just moved us 1 inch further along the way? So they're the sorts of questions that I'd encourage you to think about when you're looking at what makes the difference.
Got it. Interesting thought process there. It's funny because I was just sitting here reflecting on my own individual leadership style. And you mentioned the word reactionary. And I am an extremely passionate leader. And my thought process is like, bang, 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 bang. And what ends up happening inevitably is I'm thinking so fast and so far ahead that those around me, as I begin to ask questions, what about this? Did we figure this out? Did we address that? Well, why not? Well, what did we think about this? Well, what happens if? Well, who are you going to engage? All of a sudden now it becomes a interrogation. And that interrogation then becomes now for some people on the team, what they have felt is like, it's like bang, 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 bang. Jeez, like, did you even process the one thing that I did good? And it's interesting, Brad, because I've tried to change this personality component forever. And now what I'm resolved in is every single person who comes into the organization, when they are interviewing, I describe to them my personality style. And I describe to them this quality and this trait. And I say, what people will always say about me is two things. Number one, I am extremely direct. And as a matter of fact, when you first got on the phone, I even said to you, hey man, I need to go pee. I haven't peed since 7:30 and I need to go get water because I ran out of water. Extremely direct. Yeah. And for some people, that is like nails on a chalkboard, right? This direct approach and direct style. And I'll tell you a story, what happened last night as well about that. And it's funny because those that are extremely direct with me, it's like nails on a chalkboard for me, right? So last night, we went to back to school night and had a chance to meet my son's teachers and kind of get to know them and get the 10-minute spiel from, math, science, PE, all those, et cetera. And there was one teacher who was speaking for on behalf of the whole group of teachers in that particular course set of instruction. And she was, and it was like super fast, super aggressive. And then one teacher started talking and she was like, okay, you're talking too much. Let's move on. And I was just like, whoa. So afterwards, we went up to introduce ourselves and say hello. And then my wife asked a question about a upcoming field trip. And she said, because it's a trip to New York. And so my wife said, hey, I just want to find out, are you allowing parent chaperones? Because we're not comfortable letting my son go off with one of us not being there. But if it was, us being there, then sure, we'd be a chaperone and we'd volunteer our time. And my wife, I don't even think got to finish. I was wondering if you would allow for parent, and I don't even think she said the word chaperones. Maybe she got the word in, right? And immediately the teacher said, absolutely not. Did you like that answer? Was I clear enough for you? And I was just like, whoa. Whoa. So, and my son is has a similar personality to my wife, which is like, hey man, if you're too overwhelming, like I don't need to do you, and so he's talked about how she's been quite overwhelming. But that having been said, my point is, as people talk about my direct style, and I am very aware of it, but I also talk about the next thing that people talk about, which is my sense of loyalty. You've got me, I've got you. There'll never be a situation where I don't have your back. And it's very similar to what I think about, the Latino culture. You could be in a massive fight, and then 10 minutes later, you're in a knife fight and you've got each other's back. It's just, right? And like you're fighting with each other, you turn around and you got that person's back. I know it's very dysfunctional. But that having been said, I think a lot of leaders are, all that to have been said, that most leaders are well educated and experienced, but I also believe that many leaders don't understand their own individual makeup and their own individual weaknesses, and there's a they don't recognize these limitations. Whereas myself, I very much recognize it, and I know it's not for everyone, which is why every interview I describe it to the T. I have them go read my reviews, and I say, if this is not the style of leadership that you want to work with, which I respect, you need to withdraw from the process now. Because I'm not changing, and I haven't changed, but I will tell you exactly how I am so that you have the right expectation. So I have a bunch of folks in the organization who put up with the reaction, with the passion, with the fire, with the direct approach. And those that have not been able to, I've learned now that it's best to say it up front before anything bad happens beyond that. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, Mario, first of all, thanks for being open and vulnerable and telling everyone about your style, right? Because to be honest, there's a little bit more of that's required in the world, in my opinion. It just makes it, it's okay to be a human being who's got strengths and weaknesses.
Sure, absolutely.
It's okay to have strengths, but we'll talk about that. And it's okay to talk about a weakness, and fundamentally, sometimes the strength is a weakness, quite frankly.
Absolutely, 100%.
And you see that I call it the entrepreneur's curse. You're so immersed in your business, you're asking every question because you want it to succeed. Your passion is showing up every day. That's just your example, Mario. You've got that, and you've got that inherent bias as well. You're already a guy that's driven to take action. You've got you probably aspects of you that compute or process information a little faster than the average person, all sorts of stuff, right? So we've got all these different things that make us up. And in the end, though, that bias, we've got to ask a question, because it's going to happen for everyone. On this call, every single person listening will have bias. Right? You have been conditioned through childhood. You have biological aspects of you that will drive a degree of bias in the way that you function, right? And that was designed to keep us safe as a human being. Our brains are wired in ways that generate us to continue repeating things that are good for us, right? And while we do that, we will get to a certain part of our career or our life and it's effective. And the question is, when is it not effective? Now, that ineffectiveness is in a couple of areas. So one is just in the way that I feel I need to be in my life, right? There are times where, you'll become tired of that bias and it won't be showing up for you personally. You'll be walking into work tired of having to deal with the same issues because what you project will be what you receive, right? So you continually get the same thing back because who you are is how, is the people you're leading are a reflection of you. That's all they are. They're just reflecting back what you're projecting as a leader. And so you'll start to notice that you might become tired or frustrated or resentful, or you'll see all these notice points in your mindset around, well, why is this happening? Right? Now, the other part of it then will go, okay, let's go to the business and say, how effective is the business function? And the business is also a reflection. If you go all the way to the CEO or the board, but the business is a reflection of the CEO, right? It's completely a reflection. All of the decisions that are made cascade down, all of the conversations and the emotion that's driven from those conversations goes to one leader that then permeates through the business. And there's all of this byproduct that occurs, right? And so the question we now have to ask is, well, where is that bias driving us and how effective is it? Now, for me, the piece that I often encourage people to respect is that the blind spots that hold us back are the ones that we need to look at the most, or the pieces of that bias that are too, unhelpful, need to be examined differently to get a different result. And this idea of having a playbook. I have one myself. I have the Brad playbook. When you come into work with us, you know what it looks like to work with me. And I created that very recently, actually, because what I found is that my bias is around the way I function. And I have a small practice, so there's not too many of us. But when you engage with me, I much prefer that you pick the phone up and have a discussion. I don't need to have an email. So that's great and that's healthy. And there's all these parts of me, but there's other parts that I've got to respect, that I'm here to take that team on a journey. And so I don't have all the right answers. In fact, I'd be arrogant to assume that I have all the right answers. And it's the initial starting point to be respectful that we are in fact being arrogant if we believe that we don't have bias and that we all know all the answers. And so then the question is, with those blind spots, well, how do we deal with them? The first piece is to be curious about them at an individual level, right? What do I need? What am I learning here? How can I grow? If I grow, does that allow the business to grow? Does that allow my team to grow? Does it allow them to step up and take that vacuum that I'm creating by me becoming a stronger player in my environment? That curiosity then starts to go into bigger questions of, well, I don't know, right? So I then need third-party information. I need some sort of stimuli. So maybe that's a mentor, a coach, or a member of the team that sort of shines the light on it differently. Now, at the end of the day, that doesn't abdicate your responsibility to make judgment, deal with the situation, still make calls that are supposed to be good for the business and good for you. But to have in those data points becomes challenging, because you have to slow down, or you have to spend some time sitting around and asking the big questions. But it becomes so powerful when you start to realize that there are different ways to get that additional 10% performance or 20% performance or whatever it is that you're looking to get from an environment. So the ability to get around that, explore, debate, challenge the blind spot is a very healthy thing to do, but very confronting for a lot of leaders, and it's very okay if you're a leader listening to this to say, I don't want to do that, but you just got to respect you're going to get the results that you're going to get, right? And so, okay, well, I've got this bias. This is who I am. You'll always attract very similar situations. You'll be very effective in certain areas. Probably have been effective in already, but you'll also find that the same deficits will probably keep showing up in different ways, but they'll keep showing up. If we start to look more holistically around it, I know leaders that are in very late stages of their life, probably don't want to retire because they love what they're doing so much, but they continue to grow. And by them continue to grow, by them continue to challenge the bias and the blind spot, and be okay about that, means that they continue to drive forward with whatever they're doing. And I think it's a really healthy way to think about your leadership. And I think it's a really healthy way to think about bias, to be okay with it first, and then to just lean into it. Lean into it in a way that's really productive, focused on where you want to get it. But Mario, for you, mate, you just share your own story. What does that resonate with you as a leader when I put that on the table?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things you just said is the people that you attract, it's going to come out in certain other ways, right? So what I've noticed is that you're either going to, in my style, you're either going to attract those that are extremely docile and will be like, okay, I can handle that, and now I'm taking a direction and I'm moving forward, and that will create a situation where there's a lot more doing than thinking. That's one output, which is what you reference. And then on the other side, there's going to be those that are going to say, I love working with that type of style. That's what, everything my family is like. But rest assured, I'm going to give you the feedback, and I'm going to tell you when I think you're wrong. And now as a leader, you've got to be prepared. Can you handle that? Can you take that? And I think that's super important. And so I love either one of those things. In fact, I was just talking with one of our folks today, and he presented a situation on our software testing that I had not thought about. And he wanted to actually change the way we did it. And I said, well, if you think about this, there is your circumstance, and then there's this circumstance, which is what we built for, which is the highest, worst possible common denominator that we've got to be able to do software quality assurance testing for. So if you water this down to adjust to the minor component, then you're always going to be messing up on the major. So how about you take the major template, the quality assurance testing template, copy it, now create one for the major releases and create one for minor, And for the minor, where you don't need to do all this rigorous testing, you water it down. But you do have to manage to this, right? So, and then the response was, okay, sounds good. So I thought for a second on that response, I said, do they agree with it? Or are they saying, okay, sounds good because that's what the boss said? So my very specific words back was, that's not a directive, Papi. I called him Papi. It's a guy inside the organization. So I called many of the men Papi inside and that's just a very Latino thing, right? It's a conversation. If you agree, good. If you don't, say that. That's what I wrote on chat, because what I want people to recognize is that, hey, I'm giving you what sounds like a directive, but it's actually not. I want you to push back, and it's okay to push back. And you need to know that that's what we want to encourage is thought process. But just because I rapid fire does not mean that it's directive. What it does mean is that there is opportunity to be wrong and that there's opportunity for you to give your viewpoint. So that was the message, which is I want to make sure that you feel like you have a voice. Don't just say, okay, because that's what I said. Let me know if you agree, because ultimately you have the ownership of this project. And if it fails, you fail not because you said, I told you so, was because you didn't take the time to say, I don't agree. And that's super important because I swoop in and swoop out, swoop in, swoop out. And that's what a good leader does. When you need me, I'm there. But when you don't, you're on your own. But if I tell you something and you ask for my direction and you take my advice and you think it's the wrong thing to do, yet you still do it, ultimately you still own the failure.
It's a first of all, the thing I should share in your scenario there is it's great that you're self-aware, right? You're aware of your style. And that's a huge benefit. And the fact that you're explaining your style to a member of the team makes it easier for them to function, right? Because there's all these things that are going to be triggering off in what you've just done, right? So the first thing, we talk about human needs all of the time when it comes to the development of someone who's actually going to take ownership, right, of a scenario instead of going into this passive zone of going, well, the boss said, yeah, okay, right, look, I'll do what I need to do, and then, ultimately abdicate responsibility there, but just do the task, right? And in an essence, it can be brought to life in different ways. You could easily say, well, how would Brad deal? Well, Brad would have asked him a big question and asked him to explain how he understands it, right? Everyone could do it in a different way. But you're self-aware. The second piece is what's triggering off in that person's brain, right? So that, we call it the red zone. So the first thing before anyone goes into high degrees of, purposeful team player work, learning and a sense of accountability, is they want to know that these three areas are really being looked after, because they trigger a sense of reaction or resistance to change or resistance to progress. And that is safety. So do they feel safe that they can actually take on whatever you've agreed? Now, you might have said, great, you own it. They don't believe they own it, right? Safely. In their head, all of the stories in their head are going to sabotage. Control. Do they actually have autonomy and a sense of control here? And do they believe it versus, as Mario said it? And that's the interesting part, right? Is Mario said, I have control, but I feel like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Now that's not something that's something we go, right, how do we cultivate that sense of control that we've given someone a direction and they've got to formulate control, but we create an environment that creates control. Like there's this whole, piece around that. The more autonomy they have in their brain and the belief system, the more likely they are to pursue the question with a sense of selflessness rather than, oh, wow, I'm only doing this to protect my job. And the final thing is status, right? This sense that people all need to feel a sense of uniqueness and important. Now, if they don't feel important coming out of that conversation, right, they're going to go, well, great idea. And this is the little story, there's something going on in their head that just keeps talking back to them. Yeah, great idea. Yeah, look, of course I agree with you, mate, but you just made me feel like shit, so I'm just not bought in. Now, I've just made up those narratives, by the way. They're not what's happening, but they're the layers that we look for if we're thinking about the engagement through to that higher performing culture. And so I think the first thing that I loved about what you did there, Mario, is just acknowledge this is who I am. I'm trying to make a safe environment for you. I'm trying to create an environment where I'll come in and I'll give you all of that control by giving you good direction. I'll give you control by giving you clarity. I'll make you feel safe because I'm telling you, give me the answer. It's okay. I'm fine if the answer is no to Mario's idea. I'm letting you know that, and I value enough to be in this conversation. And that's I value you to be here talking about this and challenging me on this idea. And I love the idea you've come to me with. Thank you. Yeah, those are the things that I think in what you just role model is really powerful.
Love it. And I think what's important is we say this as leaders, but do we really mean this? Meaning, do you want to really be the smartest one in the room? Or do you want other people to be able to come up with great ideas? I tell you, early on in my career, I always felt like I've got to be able to be the highest exceller in the room. I want everybody to notice who I am. I want everybody to feel how great and smart I am, right? Because then they'll come to me as a resource. And to a large degree, that worked really, really well in terms of becoming a resource where everybody would come to you to be able to say what, how, when, where, who, right? And that's really, that was great. But what it fostered is that nobody thought for themselves. And so to your point, way a long time ago, I think one of the things that we need to be thinking about as leaders is, am I the only person that is thinking through the process? And if I'm the only person that's thinking through that process and doing the what ifs and the how comes and they, oh, I didn't think about that, then the problem is either A, you've hired the wrong people, B, your personality is one that is stifling progressive growth, or 3, something else, and you better figure it out. And that's why they need someone like you.
Well, to be fair, look, I would never suggest that a business should be relying on consultants to do all of their thinking, right? But it's supposed to facilitate better thinking, right? And if I look at the example you just shared there, 9 times out of 10, one of the greatest things we can create is this sense of alignment and ability for people to get around a problem and talk about it and own it and squeeze it. Allow for people to reject ideas, allow for them to pressure test it, but still in an organized, controlled way, rather than an authoritarian way. You must sort of get to this answer at the end here anyway. So, you might as well just jump to the conclusion. Let's go and belt it around and get people to show their best and show what their thought process is around it. Because the more they do that, the more they intrinsically own it. And that's so powerful. It's so powerful when your people, as they go down and cascade through the business, that they're not blindly running through tasks and checklists and scripts and all of that, but they own it. They show you they own it. They're bought into that, not just by saying, hey, I'm here and I'm turning up, but they've bought into it by being part of these sorts of conversations where we make it okay to, look, I've looked at the process, and this is that example that you shared before. I've looked at the process and it just doesn't make sense to me. And even if they're misreading the situation, in terms of the bigger picture or the context, you'd rather that in a healthy way, of course, not a whinging below the line kind of behavior where we're creating trying to deflect the responsibility of fixing it. But here is something I'd like to work on it. I think it's important to the business. I think it's important to the team. If someone's coming to you with that behavior, brilliant. If they're coming to you going, is this problem and that's why I'm failing? Right? Is that the mindset we want? Right. And that balance between, I call it below the line, the blame, excuse, denial, how to take them back up to responsibility, accountability, ownership. If our business, going back to the start, motivating and inspiring people plays above the line, pretty hard team to beat.
Love it. Well, we're coming up on time here. In fact, we're a little bit over time. So this was a good conversation, Brad. If somebody wants to connect with you or get a hold of you, what's the best way? Or is it LinkedIn, email, Twitter? What's the best way to connect with you?
LinkedIn is very efficient. I've got to say, type my name in, you'll find me very, very quickly. Brad Eisenhuth, the Outperformer, you'll find it very quickly. You can connect with me there. You can go to our website. You can even Google our podcast if you like. But you'll find everything you need to on LinkedIn. It's a great little place, I think.
Fantastic. And so for those of you looking for Brad, it's Brad Eisenhuth, Eisenhuth. So make sure you reach out and tell him, please, that you found him or heard him on the Modern Selling Podcast. And Brad, I got one final question for you, and that is your all-time favorite movie. What is it?
I don't know how you feel about this, but I really like the movie Scarface.
You went old school.
Yeah, the Aussies looking into that crazy culture over there. That was an amazing movie. Just to me, it just felt so far-fetched, but so cool.
Scarface it is. We've had that a couple times, so don't feel bad. Not a problem whatsoever. And for all of you listening in right now, Brad, thank you so much for joining us here on the Modern Selling Podcast. And hey, everyone else, make sure you listen to this message right now. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Oh, and don't forget, if you'd like to save 20 hours or more in a month and increase your productivity, go right now and download Fly Message, that's flymsg.io, for free. It's your free text expander and personal writing assistant. Hey, thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.